game finished loading ages ago, by the way. It just wants you to listen to the whole music. Also, the sun doesn't actually make anything brighter, it just causes a shadow to appear, so if anything, it makes it darker. Now, pay attention. We have some mushrooms and a snail in the bottom right, watch out for those later, and some tulips in the bottom left, although thankfully these ones don't have faces. The sun is rising behind the hill, meaning we're facing east, so to the north we have some thick woods and to the south we have a lone tree. On the main menu we can see the same hill again with the mushrooms and the snail, although this time there's a stone that says Peggle Institute on it. We'll come back to that much later. But look into the background, we can see the wooded hills on our right this time, so this isn't actually the same place as in the loading screen. If the woods are to our right, then we're now facing west, which means the sun is now setting. And if we hover over the quit button, the sky darkens. All this means that every time we start the game, the sun rises, and every time we leave the game, the sun sets. You also may have noted that when we hovered over the quit button, it played a musical note. There are 8 menu buttons total, and together they form a major scale. But why? Well, the most iconic piece of music associated with Peggle is Ode to Joy, played every time you beat a level. There's only one way to play Ode to Joy on a major scale, and doing so unlocks an Easter egg secret ending. Welcome to the greatest game of all time. The game is simple. Hit all the orange pegs to win. There are some blue pegs too, but they mostly just get in the way. There will always be 25 orange pegs in the standard levels, chosen mostly at random, although, for example, they'll never appear on the bottom 2 rows on the first level to make it a bit easier. You can see how many balls you have left in the bullotron. It says 8 at the top, and if you count them up, you'll find there are only 7. The 8th is in the launcher at the top. If you run out of balls, you lose. In level 2, we get a new type of peg. If you're only slightly bouncing off a block, then instead you'll slide along them. And if you hit 13 pegs in quick succession, you get a bonus called Extreme Slide for 50k. Although you don't actually need to be sliding to get it. You may also have noticed the unicorn at the top of the screen. His name is Bjorn, and he claims to be the boss of the Peggle Institute. Whenever you hit a green peg, it activates his magic power, called Super Guide. When you aim at a peg, it comes up with a line to show you where your ball will go. It also extends your blue arrow when you're aiming at nothing, although it's cut short if you aim at something moving. It's also great for exposing how everything's made up of polygons rather than curves. One nice feature is that the blue line disappears gradually as you move along it, although sometimes this can go wrong if moving pegs get in the way. It also does something interesting with portals. So normally your blue arrow goes through the portal so you can line up portal shots. This normally also works with Super Guide, unless you bounce off something and then go through the portal, in which case it glitches out a bit. Except in the only other portal level, they changed it for some reason so it works more like you'd expect. The blue line also disappears as soon as you shoot if you're aiming through a portal, which is a bit of a shame. One use for Super Guide is for making long shots, and you get bonus points if they're far enough away. You have to bounce the ball from a non-blue peg to another non-blue peg, and they have to be the first 2 pegs of the shot. Although, it can bounce on other stuff like the wall or the bucket. Also, it can hit a blue peg second, as long as it hits a non-blue peg quickly afterwards. You can also get super long shots as well. The distance is based on the distance between the pegs though, not on how far your ball travels, so you can use portals to kind of cheat it. Also, you can get the long shot bonus for pegs that are close to each other, as long as the peg was far enough away when you first hit it. But there's something else that Super Guide does as well, although it's quite subtle. Okay, so on PC, the launcher will aim at your mouse. Well, actually it aims a bit higher to account for gravity. You can also tap the arrow keys to make small adjustments of 0.1 degree. But Bjorn's power changes this, even though it doesn't tell you. It makes it so that the arrow keys change the rebound angle of the ball. It's best to see this if you aim at the corner of a block. You can see we're hardly changing the angle of the launcher, but we're able to smoothly change the angle it will rebound at. It's the sort of thing that you don't notice when it's there, but you'd notice if it were missing. In fact, there's one more hidden thing that Bjorn's power does as well, but we'll come back to that much later. And if you're thinking, who could aim more accurately than that? Then you'd be right. Our second Peggle master is Jimmy Lightning. He's really cool because he rides a skateboard and says stuff like radical and tubular, even if nobody knows what it means. Jimmy will follow you around throughout your time at the Institute, and occasionally pop up in the corner of your screen if you make a cool shot, even if he's also at the top of your screen. In fact, he can even pop up before you've met him properly. Jimmy has his own power called Multiball, It's one of 4 ways in the game to instantly destroy a peg just by touching it. There are a few cool things you can do with this. If you get it twice in one level, you get a bonus called triple play, although you get a bonus if you hit any 2 green pegs no matter what power you have. Or if you save the green peg until after you've hit all the orange pegs, then you get a bonus called multi-ball madness, and both balls will give you points in the bins at the bottom. Also, you get a free ball if you land a shot in the bucket, and if you land both the balls in the bucket, then you get a bonus called free ball frenzy, and you get 100k points. Get used to seeing crazy numbers of points, by the way. The game doesn't hold back on giving you ridiculously huge numbers for very little work. As a reference, the high score for every level starts at 300k, and that can sometimes be a little tricky to beat. So 100k points is a lot. The other bonuses you can get from the bucket are Lucky Bounce, if it bounces long enough and then goes in, and also Kick the Bucket, if you manage to bounce it off to hit the final peg. You can do this on purpose if you know what you're doing, either strategically or just to show off. In fact, if you ask me, I think it's a shame that it's only 25k points, because it's fun to try and go for it more often. You can of course go for the bucket every shot if you want to. You stand a higher chance of it going in if the bucket is moving in the same direction as the ball itself. You also might have noticed that there's something funky going on with the momentum. It leads to some pretty crazy shots sometimes. You can also do this with the bumpers that pop up at the end to get some ridiculous momentum shots. Or even on levels with moving pegs, things can go weirdly. We're next introduced to at.that with an ancient Egyptian themed level set. Hitting a green peg now gives us pyramid power. There's a beam of light, then the pyramid builds outwards. It's just a shame the ball hardly ever goes in. If it does though, you get a bonus called pyramid pickup, and these glowy hieroglyphs I think come out. You can even get both pyramid pickup and lucky bounce at the same time if you bounce it correctly. And like the normal buckets, you can still use it for tactical shots. There's actually another thing about this level that's ancient Egyptian themed though, other than the background and the UI, something in the level itself. Can you spot it? Well, these bricks actually have pyramids on top. I mean, I assume they're pyramids. This is the only level in the game these bricks appear in, and it's the introduction to the pyramid power, so I imagine it's supposed to be themed. By the way, at.dat's thing is she really likes yarn. Also, one unusual thing about this game is that all the dialogue boxes have titles, as if everyone has to announce what they're talking about before they say anything. The final at.dat level is called the Fever level. Extreme Fever in Peggle happens when you've hit all the orange pegs. Why is it called Fever? Well, Bjorn refuses to tell anyone, but it's just because the orange counter on the right hand side is themed like a thermometer, hence the name Fever Meter. There are 25 lights for the 25 orange pegs. Also, I should explain how the point system works. We've seen points for style shots already, those are in their own category. Then you also get points for hitting the pegs. Blues are worth almost nothing, and 1 orange is worth the same as 10 blues. And then 1 purple point boost peg is worth the same as 5 oranges. Exactly how much each peg is worth though depends on the multiplier shown on the right. So it can be best to try and go for oranges early to fill the fever meter and build your multiplier before going for points. Your total shot score is then adding up all the pegs you hit and then multiplying by how many pegs you hit. So even though blues are worth basically nothing, if you hit 1 point boost and 9 blues, then that point boost will be multiplied by 10. Your shot score is shown on the bulletron. The bar fills up when you reach 25k, and again when you reach 75k, and again at 125k. And each time this happens, you get a free ball. So the most free balls you can get in one shot is 6. 3 from your score filling the bulletron, and 3 from each of 3 multi-balls landing in the bucket. Also, technically Fever score is its own thing, which is your normal shot score, plus the score you get in the bins at the end, plus 10k for each unused ball. And you might be thinking, who cares more about points than just beating the level? And you'd be right. Next up, we have Splork. They're an alien with a death gun. If you hit one of Splork's green pegs, it explodes. Now, to me, it always feels like it blasts the ball away, but it doesn't actually affect the physics. You can get 2 space blasts at once to get a big bang bonus, but you can get them separately too. It sounds cool with 2 at once though. It's a pretty useful power-up when you want to clear levels later on. And if you save it till near the end when the point boost is nearby, you can get loads of points from it. There's one other thing it changes as well. So normally when there's only 1 orange peg left and your ball is close to it, there's a fever camera that zooms in and you go into slow motion. There's a drum roll. and if you miss then an audience size. You can even get it to zoom as the ball enters a portal. But it's possible to win this block by hitting a green peg instead. However, the game's thought of this and zooms in just before you hit the green peg as well. Very clever. Although, I have seen this glitch out before. On this level, you can famously get trapped inside the ring and rack up loads of points. You can also get your ball stuck in this level, although it's not really as cool. But also, you might have noticed that the background of these levels actually tell a story. This is the first one, and you can see two furry creatures sticking their heads up, which are of course Chuzzles, from a previous Popcut game called Chuzzle. It's a wildly weird game, a bit like Bejeweled, but now you have to drag Chuzzles next to each other, and they then explode, and you collect their eyes and melt them down into star juice. Fun fact, Jason Kapolka, one of the founders of PopCap, is credited as the voice actor for the Chuzzle on GameFAQs. There you go. The second level features some sort of spacecraft with multiple Chuzzles inside a glass dome, but not three of the same colour next to each other, obviously. But one Chuzzle has either escaped or got lost and is floating away. Can you spot the Chuzzle on this level? It was hiding behind one of the pegs. Can you spot it on this level? That's right, it's hiding inside the spacesuit. Those are definitely Chuzzle eyes. Can you spot it on this level? That's right, you can't. It's not there, so either it died or has been recaptured or escaped somewhere, who knows. But I think it's appropriate that Splork's Chuzzle journey ends with him finding a bowling alien. Like, this is the moment he gave up with Chuzzles and decided to come and try Peggle instead. Our fifth Peggle master is called Claude's Lobster, because he's a lobster and he has claws. His power is called Flippers, like it's from a pinball machine, even though they're clearly just his claws. Even worse, all the Peggle masters call their abilities magic powers, like they're trying to pretend it's cooler than it actually is. You can clearly tell he's just stuck his claws in through the side of the screen. Anyway, Claude is kind of just weird and unremarkable. One of his lines is, and I quote, the memories, I recall a beautiful June day, not much rain. There was a girl eating a bun on the streets of Bordeaux. I never spoke to her, but I think of her always. So, that's a bit weird. Coincidentally, you can be playing as any other Peggle master in free play mode, but if you type the word Cathy, K-A-T-H-Y, then Claude will silently appear in the corners of your screen. The other cheat codes are Shannon, which makes the background go black, Zoom toggles the zoom when you get close to the final orange peg, and typing Scots lets you fast forward during a shot. So if you want to play Peggle quickly, then you can try that one. Also, typing Steve gives your ball a hat. It's just a normal hat though, there's nothing special about it. And if you're wondering why they're all people's names, well, according to one of the devs, Brian Rothstein, they're each named after someone that expressed an opinion on the game during its development. So the Cathy cheat code is named after his sister.
We had this one level that had flippers on it. It just always had flippers. There was no such thing as flipper power-up. My sister was playing that level, and she said, hey, I want every level to have flippers. I said, I don't know about that.
Cathy is also one of only 2 female names that can appear on the leaderboards, out of a pool of, I think, 32. Most of the rest seem to be PopCap employees, with Brian Rothstein appearing as his nickname Ace. There's also one called Jimmy Goggle, which is presumably a reference I don't get. You can also type piano, Seattle, tennis, or pitcher, but you'll end up with a blank level. These were supposed to be Easter egg levels, but Brian quit before the final release, and so they were accidentally left out. But if you mod the game, then you can put these levels back in. You can find the files over on the Peggle Discord server. Claude's power is alright. If you use it 4 times in a row to hit pegs, then you get the Flipper Maniac bonus. And even if you don't use the flippers, it decreases the size of the screen you can fall through, which makes it more likely you'll land in the bucket or land in a higher value bin at the end. The bucket will smoothly transition to a smaller oscillation as well, or at least almost smoothly. But more importantly, there's a really weird hidden mechanic with Claude's flippers. So if there are pegs where the flippers are about to go, then the pegs get removed by the game. But what if one of the pegs is orange? They can't just remove an orange peg because that would make the level impossible. So instead, they turn one of the non-orange pegs orange. This can even turn a green peg into an orange peg. But what happens if there are no other pegs to turn into orange pegs? Then the game resurrects pegs so that you can still beat the level. Somehow this possibility was accounted for. It's the only time in the game that new pegs can appear after the level's already started. So if that's what it does for orange pegs, then what about green pegs? Well, normally green pegs don't spawn in the bottom quarter of the screen, so it's easier to hit them early on in the level. But there is one level where the greens can potentially overlap with the flippers. But the game doesn't care about green pegs as much as you don't need them to beat the level, so they just disappear. It's also worth noting that occasionally you can get greens to spawn lower in dual modes, but also, if there's no good spot for them then they just won't spawn at all. The other weird thing about this mechanic is that it doesn't work with the instant replay feature. So, there's a button in the bottom right that lets you save a replay of a shot. A lot of these clips have been replays I've saved. And normally this works fine, but the replay doesn't save which pegs are turned into orange pegs, so the replay will be different each time you watch it. This can sometimes make the difference between winning and losing a level. The replay also glitches out if you have 3 multi-balls on the screen at once. It's fine when you're playing normally, but in the replay the physics start going weird and balls bounce off nothing or glitch through blocks. In fact, remember the shot earlier where I got 6 free balls? So I was using the Scott cheat code to make things go quicker, but when I watched back the replay, one of the balls just falls off the edge, so I can't watch it back at normal speed sadly. There's also this weird out of bounds shot I got once, where the ball just vanishes in the replay for some reason, even though it didn't in the original shot. It's a shame because the replay feature is pretty robust for everything else I've tested it with. Our next Peggle master is Renfield. We're halfway through the masters now, but let's stop and have a look at this screen for a second. So you can see the 6 masters we've met so far, and then 4 more that are silhouetted. Then there's a question mark that's locked, which is mysterious, but it turns out just to be the pick a random character button. But then at the bottom there are 15 locked stars of different colours, corresponding to the 15 pages in challenge mode, which is a bit misleading. They're just the same levels again, but with different numbers of orange pegs, or you have to get a certain score or something. The silhouetted star in a ring is the shape of the wreath you get for beating a challenge, and they're coloured based on the types of challenges. The thing is, to get to challenge mode you need to beat adventure mode first. But once you've beaten adventure mode, you can never come back to the screen, so you can never see a completed version of this progress tracker. The bottom part is just completely static, and that's upsetting. While we're on the topic, let's go through the other menu buttons. There's Quick Play, which lets you replay levels you've unlocked, although the final 5 levels won't appear at all until you get there in adventure mode. I'm not sure why. Then there's Dual Mode, which lets you play against a friend or the computer. One way to trick the computer is to pick a level where the oranges can be off screen. Then if you time it right, the computer will get confused and do a bad shot. Duels also changes the point scoring system so that skill shots are worth less. Fun fact, it's possible to get a score of 0 on duels if you don't hit any orange pegs in a shot. And normally the game auto-saves your progress if you quit halfway through a level, but if both players have a score of 0 when you quit, then the game doesn't bother to save your progress. Apparently your duel was so bad that it wasn't worth continuing. There's also a demo mode where you can just watch the computer play by itself. You can still use the Scott cheat code to speed up their gameplay by the way, which is pretty entertaining. The AI is generally pretty good, but I've seen them fail levels occasionally. Also, it's possible for them to beat your level high scores, but they don't show up on the leaderboard afterwards. Finally, you can access your replays and also find the options menu, which itself contains the help menu, which actually hides some really useful information, like the fact that you can right-click the replay button to see all the replays for a level. I think a lot of people still don't know about this. Renfield is a pumpkin. He has no arms or legs, so he has to be carried around by someone called Igor. His magic power is called Spooky Ball, and it makes the ball drop back in at the top of the screen. More on that later. The other thing Renfield's power does is put a lid on the bucket. You can occasionally get the ball caught between the rim of the bucket and the lid, so that's kind of fun, but not that useful. Also, if you save the power until the end of the level, then you can use the Spooky Ball to get 2 or even 3 tries at landing in the bins at the bottom, and all of those points add up. Every time you get a Spooky Ball, 3 ghosts appear, and one of them takes your ball back to the top. You can also see these ghosts in the top corners of the UI, and in the background of this level. In general, I think Renfield has the most artistic backgrounds in his level set. There's a lot of attention to detail. Also, I like to think that the Peggle Masters get to choose their own backgrounds for the levels. So Bjorn took some scenic photos, Jimmy photographed some animals, Kat is a history nerd who likes papyrus scrolls, and all of Splork's feature either something scientifically interesting or a cool robot. Renfield's on the other hand I think are just cool art pieces. By the way, the UI is different depending on which level set you're playing in, and you also may have noticed the slightly weird character portraits at the top. Their eyes follow the ball as it moves, but the eyes aren't quite in sync with each other, so it's slightly unnerving. Also, you may have noticed that there's a brief frame of animation as they're swapping sides when they look directly at you. It's hard to notice, but if you put all of them on the same screen at once, then it's very, very strange. Admittedly, I've had to take a couple of liberties with the eyes. That's not the only hidden thing in this game though. Normally there are 8 music tracks that loop in the background as you play a level. But when I was playing recently, a new track I had never heard before started playing. If you recognise it, then it's likely you played Peggle on either a console or a mobile port. However, it's definitely not one of the standard tracks in the PC version, so why did it come up? We can look into the game's files, and all the level tracks are stored in a .mo3 file, which as far as I understand, combines MIDI tracks with custom MP3 synths. The file name is Peggle Beats, although internally it's called Peggo Beats. So fun fact, the game was originally going to be called Peggo for most of its development, but they changed the name for copyright reasons. Anyway, sure enough you can find 8 normal tracks in here, and the secret track, but also a second hidden track as well. Again, apparently it's common in the mobile and DS ports, but I've never heard it in the PC version. However, on YouTube videos of the track, despite most comments claiming not to recognise it, there are a couple saying they've heard it once. So I'd hypothesise that it's possible to hear this one in the PC version as well. As far as I can see, either it's a glitch that it plays sometimes, or the devs made it a really rare chance of playing, or there's something specific I did by accident that caused it to play. I was copying and pasting save files, but other than that the game wasn't modified in any way. I had been trying to beat the levels while landing the ball in the bucket every shot, and resetting until I timed it right, but I haven't been able to recreate what I did. Unfortunately I was kind of taken by surprise when it happened and I didn't experiment around with it. And I can't find anyone else online who's heard it on PC. It's hard to know how rare it is because most people who play Peggle regularly listen to their own music instead. As you'll see later, I've done a lot of quickly entering and exiting levels and still only heard this once. So if you have any more information, please let me know. By the way, I can't explain how weird it is to be playing a game you thought you knew everything about, that you've been playing since you were a kid and suddenly just really weird music starts playing. It's actually crazy how much hidden stuff there is in this game.
Some of that stuff comes in a game being in production for a long, long time. You have nothing to do but put in more and more stuff. You know, if the game keeps going for a while, if you come in every day, you're like, what should I put into it today? And that's one of the results.
Tula Sunflower is a sunflower, although she seems to be from the Netherlands, and lots of her friends seem to be tulips, and she is called Tula, so maybe it's an ugly duckling scenario. Also, am I the only one that thinks these flowers with faces are terrifying? They don't have faces in this level, but they used to, and if that's what they looked like when I played this game as a kid, then I would have quit then and there, and this video would possibly never have existed. Anyway, there's also this level, where it's pretty easy to get your ball glitched out in one of the rings. Fun fact, they made most of the levels before they decided what the theme was going to be for each area, so I like to imagine them with a car level they spent ages on and saying, screw it, just put it in the flower section, make it a flower car, it'll be fine. Tula's power lights up 20% of the remaining orange pegs rounded up. The most you can get is 11 on a 55 orange peg challenge level, and the lowest you can get is 0. You can either use it early on to get more orange pegs out of it, or save it till later to take care of an orange peg that's otherwise hard to get. And I think you'd agree 20% rounded up is a perfectly reasonable formula. On the other hand, we have the bonus known as Orange Attack. You have to hit a certain number of the remaining orange pegs to get this bonus, and how many oranges you have to hit depends on how many oranges are on the board. So, it doesn't really matter exactly how this works, but let's agree on one thing. If you remove one orange peg from the board, then the number of oranges you need to hit for Orange Attack should either stay the same, or maybe decrease by 1, considering there's one orange peg missing. When there are 5 orange pegs on the board, you'll need to hit 4 of them to get Orange Attack, which is fair enough. But if there are 4 orange pegs on the board, then even if you hit all 4 of them, you still won't get Orange Attack, even though it should be harder now that there are fewer orange pegs to hit. But that's not even the worst of it. If there are 30 orange pegs on the board, then you need to hit 10 for Orange Attack. Pretty reasonable. But if there were 31 orange pegs on the board, then you need to hit 15 to get Orange Attack. That means you need to hit the 10 you were going to hit before, plus the new peg, plus another 4 more on top of that. It's not a good system. And does anyone care? No. No one's going for Orange Attack in challenge modes. But it still makes me a little bit sad. Also, Tula has the same thing as Splork, where if there's only one orange peg left, then the game treats the green peg as if it's the final orange peg and zooms in when you're close. We then come to Warren the Rabbit, who is a magician that both wears a hat and sits inside a hat, possibly to hide his comically large feet. Do you remember how Renfield has some really pretty backgrounds with lots of nice details? Well, get ready for Warren's backgrounds to haunt your dreams. But the really exciting thing about Warren is his magic power, called Lucky Spin. Okay, let's start with the least exciting, Extra Ball. It gives you Extra Ball. This is actually an alternative way to get 6 free balls in one shot if you don't like using multi-ball, but other than that, not very exciting. Next up is Magic Hat, which is a bit like normal hat, except it's magic. It has a hitbox that will light up pegs for you as you pass underneath. I think the ball always feels more floaty when you're wearing a hat for some reason, but there's no difference, the physics stay exactly the same. The hat flies in from off screen when it's donned, although it doesn't have a hitbox until it's on your ball. Then when the ball disappears, the hat just flies off on its own, sometimes at a really weird angle. Each time you get the magic hat in the bucket, you get a bonus called Hat Trick. Fun fact, there's only one bonus in the game with Lucky in its name, and that's Lucky Bounce for 25k. But if you're wearing the magic hats, then it's impossible to get this bonus. You'll just get Hat Trick instead for only 10k, even though the ball bounces the same with or without magic hat. In other words, no matter how many attempts you make, you can never get lucky with the magic hat. We then have Triple Score, which triples your score after each shot. This works for filling up the free ball meter as well, and because the 75k threshold is triple the 25k threshold, it means that Triple Score will always get you up to at least 2 free balls if and only if we're going to get a free ball anyway, if that makes any sense. You can also get Triple Score twice in one shot, but it just gives you 4 turns of Triple Score rather than 2. Triple Score works on your normal shot score, but it doesn't work on skill shots, so you can't triple an extreme slide or anything. But it does work for a Fever Score if you save it until the very end of a level, so that means it triples your normal points, and it triples the score from the bins at the bottom, and it triples the 10k from each spare ball. This is extremely overpowered. Remember, you only need 300k points to get the high score on each level, and you can get that in one shot with Triple Score just by landing in the 100k bin and multiplying it by 3. Ideally, you'd also hit the point boost after you've triggered Fever, as it's worth twice as much then. Blue pegs also increase in value to 1k points each during Fever, so ideally you'd hit the last orange peg, get Triple Score, then hit as many blue and purple pegs as possible for a maximum score. The lower section of the wheel, on first glance, looks pretty boring. It just activates one of the other powers of the Peggle Masters that you've unlocked. Why would that be interesting? Well, for one, you can combine it with the other wheel options, like you can have a Magic Hat Multi-Ball or a Magic Hat Spooky Ball. But what's really cool is that each time you hit a green peg, you get a random power on the bottom. So it's possible to hit 2 green pegs in one level and combine 2 different magic powers. So you can do Pyramid Multi-Ball, which makes it easier to get Free Ball Frenzy, that's pretty cool. Or Multi-Ball then Spooky Ball. Does kind of what you'd expect, only one of them spooky. Or you can get Spooky Ball then Multi-Ball, but that just still does the same thing, sadly. You can get Flippers and Pyramids. Interestingly, the game stores how many Flipper turns you have left and how many Pyramid turns you have left separately. And I still managed to miss the bucket. But most exciting is the next magic power we haven't discussed yet, Fireball. Normally this makes the ball destroy every peg in its path. So of course you can have Fireball Magic Hat, or you can have Fireball Super Guide, which is actually slightly useful. Flippers and Fireball is cool. Similarly, you can bounce the Fireball off the pyramid if you want to. And unfortunately, Fireball Multi-Ball doesn't work, although it's entertaining to watch. And honestly, I was going to leave it there. I was a bit disappointed that you couldn't get 2 spooky balls going at once, and I thought, oh well, time to move on. But then I found this game facts discussion from 15 years ago where one person votes, and I quote, "I got a spooky fireball once. The fireball was green, lol." And I couldn't believe it. So I kept spinning that wheel and eventually I got this shot. It's a spooky fireball. It's a fireball and it's spooky. The shot was a bit rubbish though, but can't be helped. So that's kind of the end of this section, but there's one more thing I want to mention. You remember how I said how clever the game was that it recognises when you're about to win from Splork's or Tudor's power and it zooms in beforehand? Well, the game can't predict the outcome of the wheel, so if you win by the wheel it just suddenly zooms when you hit it, like you've taken the game by surprise. And somehow it makes it feel like you've outsmarted the game, in a small way. Our next Peggle Master is Lord Cinderbottom. Okay, so you've seen a lot of backgrounds by now, so try and guess what this one is. That's right, it's a castle! What about this one? That's right, it's also a castle. And what about this one? You'll never get what this one is. It's actually a painting of a castle. So, all of Cindy's backgrounds feature his castle. He even shows up in 3 of them, making him the only Peggle master to feature in his own backgrounds. The castle is actually magic, and you can tell it's magic because the reflection doesn't line up properly. Twice. And just in case you weren't sure it was his castle, he shows us this background, with pictures of himself on the carpet, and on the shield on the wall, and he's hanging out in the background as well. But there are also a couple more interesting details in this room. You may have noticed the chisel statues above each of the doorways, and you may also have noticed that this image contains 6 statues of Lex the Bookworm. That's right, Lex from Bookworm Deluxe and its popular sequel Bookworm Adventures. Fun fact, Bookworm Adventures has been pulled from all stores and is no longer available to purchase anywhere, and strangely no one seems to know why. But if there's one thing for sure, it means that these 6 statues have just become a lot more valuable. Cindy's magic power, as mentioned before, is the fireball, which destroys all pegs it comes in contact with. And to stop it falling out of the level straight away, they've put a lid on the bucket for you to bounce off. The lid opens if you hit it, and you can still land the fireball in the bucket if you want to and get the hot stuff bonus. Or you can try to bounce the fireball off the rim instead, which won't open the lid. You can still bounce it off the bucket more than once. Fun fact, the fireball allows you to aim at a higher angle than you can normally, but I'm not sure why. Okay, let's talk about something I haven't mentioned yet, how pegs disappear. So, normally pegs light up when you hit them and then disappear at the end of a shot. But sometimes this isn't enough, like if the ball gets stuck somewhere. So the game checks to see if your ball has been going too slowly for a while, then it starts removing the pegs you've already hit. And it does this even if you're just about to slide down a slope or something, so it can get pretty annoying. In fact, it can even kick in if you've been balancing on a round peg for too long. Also, even if you haven't stopped moving, it will eventually start removing pegs after a while anyway, just in case you're in a weird edge case scenario, like that Splork level where you can get caught in the ring. Or I had the ball get caught vibrating between 2 pegs one time, and eventually they got removed, but it took a really long time. For another example, you can ride the pegs at the bottom of the car level, but the game still thinks the ball is moving, so it holds off from removing any pegs. That's because there isn't actually any friction in the game. So what's actually happening is, the ball is just coincidentally sliding at the same speed as the bricks underneath are moving. If you have multi-ball, then it requires both balls to stop moving before it starts removing pegs, so you can end up with one ball just sitting forlornly at the side of the screen. One important thing to understand about this process is that it always removes the pegs in the order that you hit them. And this lets you predict where the ball is going to go. So for example, in this level, you'll always fall in the direction of the peg you hit first, so you alternate falling left and falling right. Or in this one, it's beneficial to try and hit the wall first so that you'll fall in that direction. The other really weird thing about this mechanic is kind of hard to describe, but if your ball lights up another peg while the pegs are being removed, then that new peg will also be removed. So watch this purple peg. It gets removed, even though the ball wasn't stuck there. It just gets added to the chain. So for example, how you enter this corner will determine whether or not you reach this peg here. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. And I know Peggle isn't the most predictable game in the world, but this just makes it a little bit harder. So this mechanic should be fine on its own to stop the ball getting stuck, right? Well, its main problem is that it takes a really long time to kick in sometimes. So, the devs decided to add a second mechanic as well, called crumble pegs. You can tell the difference between crumble pegs and normal peg removal, because you don't get a sound effect or a visual effect when they crumble. They just disappear a short while after you hit them, causing like plug holes in the level, so the ball is kept moving. Only certain pegs are marked as crumble pegs. They tend to either be flat or at the bottom of curves, or more precisely local minima. But occasionally other pegs are marked as crumble pegs too. Also, vertical bricks don't automatically count as crumble pegs for some reason, so the ball can still get stuck for a while on those. And rows of flat pegs crumble one after another as the ball rolls over top, which looks kind of awkward. Specifically, you need to either bounce 3 times on a crumble peg, or slide over the top of it, then it will wait about a second and then disappear. That took me quite a while to figure out. It will still crumble even if the ball is not coming back in that direction too. And like, in general it's great that there are 2 systems of removing pegs to keep things moving, but it doesn't half make things tricky to figure out what will happen sometimes. Often it's not clear which of these 2 systems will kick in first, or sometimes both of them will need to happen. And if both of these systems still fail, and the ball gets stuck on an object somehow, then the ball just gets removed. Thanks to Vastbeat for this clip. The exception is if you get the ball caught on the flippers, in which case you can hold it for as long as you like, even during fever. So, we're nearing the end of adventure mode, but there's still more to be done. Each level also has a special rosette you can earn for full clearing it, which means taking out every peg on the board, giving you an ultra extreme fever. This level in particular is quite fun to full clear if you know what you're doing. With a bit of skill, you can bounce the ball into the corner of the level and land it in the bucket every time. There's a free ball skills bonus for getting 1 peg and getting it in the bucket, a mad skills bonus for getting 5 scoring shots in the bucket in a row, and crazy mad skills if you can do it 10 times in a row, worth 100k. This is actually one of the best ways to get points. Although if you're going for more than 10 bucket shots in a row, then you should break it up with a shot that lands in the bucket but hits nothing, which resets the counter so you can get mad skills again. In my opinion, this is the easiest way to get the 750k challenge. There's one bonus I haven't mentioned yet, by the way, which is Call Clear for 50k, a bonus I saw once in the entire time I first 100%ed the game. You need to full clear the level with either a shot that hits at least 3 pegs, or a shot that bounces from an orange peg to a non-orange peg that is far enough away. I think that's the condition anyway. Why does such an obscure bonus have such a complicated condition? I don't know. I should also mention that it's possible to cheat your way through the full clears if you want to, by using the Cathy cheat code I talked about earlier. If you combine this with the fireball, then you can take out a lot of the level in one go. I mean, it's definitely cheating, but it looks pretty cool. There are 3 trophies you can get depending on how far through the game you are. 1 for beating adventure mode, 1 for beating all the challenges, and 1 for full clearing every level as well, giving you the rank of Extreme Grand Master. And you may be thinking, who made a giant ornate trophy with wings? And who thought it was a good idea to put a yin-yang symbol on it? Who is the final Peggle Master? He's an owl that likes meditating. This is also where the background starts to get surprisingly weird, and you can spot a lot of repeating motifs of yin-yang symbols, frogs and meditation. We also get introduced to portals, although they'll only appear in one other level in the entire game, and they're missing the purple spinning texture the second time. Oh well. So whose power is called Zen Ball, and it alters your shot to try and improve it. And I'll give you some specific details from a user called Smiling Marks on the Peggle Discord, so credit to them for reverse engineering this stuff. Zen Ball considers 240 different shots, with angles varying by steps of size 0.001 radians, so I think that's 120 either side of your initial shot, with a maximum angle change of about 6.9 degrees. Because it uses radians rather than degrees, it means that Zen Ball can hit shots that you literally wouldn't be able to choose. For each of those 240 possible shots, it just adds up the point values of the pegs it hits, and then chooses the shot with the highest point count. Although the point count is different to the total score of a shot, so theoretically Zen Ball can choose a shot that has lower total score than the one you are aiming at. I haven't been able to see this though. Also, it adds additional points if it can get it in the bucket. The percentage that appears is just how much bigger the new point count is to the shot you were originally going to take, which can vary between 10 and 500. If it's more than 500, then it instead comes up with the maximum Zen achieved. If it can't improve the shot, then it says no improvements. And if you were originally going to miss entirely, but Zen shot prevents this, then it just says Zen achieved. Who doesn't actually need to pause to consider the shot? You can calculate it almost instantly. In fact, apparently it used to be instant, but they added the delay to make it feel like he was doing something. Just like the loading screen intro, it makes the game feel more impressive just by making things take longer. Also, you can combine Zen Ball with the other magic powers using Warren's Wheel, so you can get a Magic Hat Zen or a Zen Fireball. There's a bunch more stuff you could probably say about Zen Ball, but it's hard to work out without reverse engineering the code. And personally, I'm not a huge fan of Zen Ball anyway. It's a very effective power, but it takes away some of the fun of lining up shots yourself. You can spend a while choosing a good angle, and then the AI will say, nope, do this instead. But for the rest of the game, you have full control over where you shoot. Right? It turns out that the game has been altering your shots to be better without you knowing since the very beginning. This is known in the community as micro Zen. It's very difficult to tell just by looking, but if you load up the same level multiple times, you can see its effect. On an experienced account, if you put your mouse in exactly the same position each time, then the shot will be exactly the same, because the physics in Peggle are deterministic. But if you're on a new account, sometimes the shot will be different. It'll often depend on where the bucket is, and it will often try and bounce in a way such that it ends up in the bucket. Or if not, it might bounce in a way that hits more pegs, the same as normal Zen Ball. This is really weird to watch in action. So, I did a little experimenting and I found that micro-zen depends on 3 things: which level you're on, how many balls you have left, and how many times you've restarted or retried the level. It's easiest to see this on the first level, as micro-zen always kicks in when you're on 6 or fewer balls. That doesn't mean that it will always change your shots, just that it could decide to if your shot was rubbish. This makes it pretty difficult to fail the first level. In fact, I tried it 3 times with my eyes closed and clicking randomly, and I beat it all 3 times. So the crazy thing about this is that if there's a level you think is hard, just hit the restart button 4 times before you start, and micro-zen will kick in once you get to 3 balls remaining. This makes the level a fair bit easier, although it only works for your first time through adventure mode. Also, I found that if you have Bjorn's super guide, then micro-zen is disabled, otherwise it would be really obvious that the game changed your shot. So the game was rigged all along. But it doesn't stop there. If you'll remember, Renfield makes the ball drop back in at the top of the screen, directly above where it fell. But a lot of people believe that this is also rigged in the same way as micro-zen. So I set up an experiment to see if it's rigged, or if its angle is just randomly altered. I shoot the ball so that it hits the green peg, and then falls to the right of it. And hopefully you'll agree that if Spooky Ball is random, then there's at least a 50% chance that it continues falling the way it was originally falling, and misses the green peg on the second fall. So the chance of it curving left towards the green peg or the blue peg is at most 50%. I ran this experiment 400 times with an auto hotkey script, and the results were 245 of them lit up another peg. So first of all, using standard binomial distribution calculations, we can be all but certain that Renfield is definitely rigged. Here's a graph of what you would expect if the angle were random, and even with the very generous 50% estimate for the random chance of it curving left, you can see that 247 has a microscopic chance of occurring. But on the other hand, it's interesting that it didn't curve left 100% of the time. Unlike Zen Ball or micro-zen, Renfield Zen doesn't seem to be consistent. I'm guessing it picks just a few random angles around the angle it entered at, and then picks the best one, rather than always checking the same angles. It's also interesting to me that there were a couple of times when it curved left, but didn't light up any new pegs. It seemed to mostly prefer failing by just falling straight down, but perhaps in these 2 cases, all the random angles it checked happened to be really far out but didn't hit anything. Like I said, I haven't been able to reverse engineer the game myself, but if that sounds interesting to you, then I'd encourage you to try and work these things out for yourself. There is still one more way in which the game is rigged in your favour, although if you've played Peggle yourself then you probably won't be surprised by this. If you manage not to hit any pegs or the bucket with your shot, then the game flips a coin to decide whether or not you should get a free ball. In fact, the first coin flip on a new profile will always give you a free ball. And just as an initial experiment, I flipped the coin a further 1,000 times on the first level, and I got 673 free balls. So it's definitely not a fair coin. I then ran 2 experiments with the help of auto hotkey, one on the first level on a new account, and one playing on 9-4 on quick play on an extreme grandmaster account. I counted the number of heads and tails depending on how many balls you had left. I even managed to get 26 free balls in a row once. It's a bit of a flawed way to collect data, I'll admit, but I think the results are good enough. It appears that the chance for a free ball is 0.6 if you have at least 2 balls remaining, and about 0.8 if you only have 1 ball remaining. I didn't see an obvious difference between the 2 sets of results other than a few outliers. But of course, it could also depend on other variables that I didn't test for. So, we've met all the Peggle Masters, but there are still 5 more levels to go, making up the final exam. Some of these levels are pretty difficult, and are especially tricky if you want to full clear them, so let's discuss some more advanced strategies. As I mentioned earlier, Peggle has deterministic physics, so you'll always get the same shot if you aim in the same position at the same time. So one thing you can do is just make a note of where the bucket is before and after each shot, then on your second attempt of a level, you can do the same shots again, but time it perfectly so that the ball falls in the bucket every time. It's a bit tedious to do, and it might feel a bit like cheating, but it's one way to make full clearing a level a lot easier. The angle that you shoot at is entirely determined by which pixel you are pointing at, as well as how many taps of the arrow keys you did. Peggle runs in 800 by 600 by the way. This means that you can actually aim more precisely by moving your mouse further away from the launcher. In order to make the same shot twice, you'll need to aim your mouse at exactly the same pixel, and tap the arrow keys the same number of times. The easiest way to do this is to either aim at the top left or top right of the screen and try tapping the arrow keys different number of times for different shots, or if you want to practice aiming at specific pixels, you can press Ctrl-Alt-D and then Shift F3 to view the coordinates that you're aiming at. Speedrunners use this to find opening shots that can quickly take out a lot of pegs. So for example, on this level, you can aim in the top right, tap the left arrow key 6 times and then press Enter. However, this will only work if you have a specific setting turned on. There aren't actually many settings in Peggle, including no resolution settings, but there is one called 3D acceleration that will slightly improve graphics if you turn it on. For example, it makes the sun rotate in the background, it adds the rainbow during extreme fever, it adds the zoom effect, and it makes Super Guide have a solid line rather than a dotted line for some reason. But it also very slightly affects the physics system. Most people play with 3D acceleration on, but it's a little bit faster to play the game with it turned off, so that's what most speedrun strats are developed for. This one will work with it turned on though. The final level of the game features a double helix. This can be a tricky level on your first playthrough, but it's also a great example of how powerful pixel perfect shots can be. Combining this tactic with Warren's triple score can get you over 1 million points in one shot. And if you're interested in trying these for yourself, you can find more on the Peggle Project Discord server. There's a link over on the speedrun.com page. There are plenty more specific speedrunning tactics there as well. So, you've beat adventure modes, you've beat all the challenges, and you've full cleared every level in the game. That's all there is, right? At the end of the day, it's just a simple game about clearing pegs. There's nothing special here. Well, there are actually a few more hidden lines of dialogue that might change the way you see the game. In fact, I've shown a few of them already. You can play through adventure mode again, this time with choosing any character you like for each level, and you'll get different lines of dialogue from each Peggle master. In fact, in order to see all of the lines of dialogue, you'll need to beat adventure mode another 3 times. And that makes this the perfect place to hide some truly fascinating character details. Take Warren, for example. He already seems a little obsessed with gambling, and it is a slightly odd decision for his power to be themed around a roulette wheel in what is basically a children's game. But in the New Game Plus, it's implied he was a literal gambling addict who lost almost all of his money at a roulette wheel and took a job offer from Bjorn out of desperation. I can't emphasise enough how crazy this is for a backstory for a character from the video game Peggle. Or take Tudor. There's first a joke about how she'd love to travel a lot, but she can't because she's a flower. And then she says that sometimes she gets sad, and if she does, she just smiles even harder until her face hurts. And sure, you might just see this as kind of edgy humour of its era, but in the context of the other characters, I think it's a lot more nuanced. Claude is weird, slightly creepy, and makes toilet humour jokes. Renfield is implied to have previously worked in a haunted house. Cinderbottom is vain and pompous. Who is slightly hopeless and doesn't take his whole philosophy thing too seriously. Cat and Splork are both pretty boring, and Jimmy awkwardly explains what tubular means. The game makes sure to set Peggle unambiguously in the real world. As well as mentioning Bordeaux, it makes clear that all these fantasy characters still worry about money and work boring jobs and eat fast food. It's definitely not an obvious direction for the game, but I think they did a great job of including nuanced characters while still keeping that positive Peggle vibe. Honestly, the characters in this game bring me a lot of joy. And it begs the question, is this a children's game? Jimmy even has a joke about it in New Game Plus. Personally, I just love the fact that they were willing to commit to the unicorn rainbow aesthetic for a game that actually has a huge amount of thought and care put into it. Especially in 2007, this kind of theming was hard to sell to the hardcore gaming audience, but they put in the work to make it as good as it could be anyway.
We went all out on the unicorns and the rainbows, and regardless what anybody thought, if you want to play this game, you got to deal with the rainbows and fairies.
Another thing that sort of differentiates Peggle that we've seen is that it seems to appeal to both casual players who like Bejeweled and Zuma, but also to hardcore players who play Half-Life. And not quite sure why that is, but we're certainly happy about that.
But there's still one more important character I haven't talked about yet. Who is Bjorn in all of this? If the game is set in the real world, then what is Peggle? So first of all, Bjorn invented Peggle, or so he claims. He also implies that it's actually a physical game played on an air hockey table. I don't think you're supposed to make the comparison to actual gameplay too literally, but there are some nods to this in the levels themselves. Like how Claude's flippers are just his claws, or how the physical objects in the game look like random household objects that each of the characters would have lying around. The exception to this is Bjorn's levels, which actually have really nice physical objects in them, which makes sense as he's the one that invented the game. Also, Claude has a weird fish, I had to mention that at some point. Bjorn's next step to turn this into a business was to hire some teachers. We've already covered how Warren was offered a job, but of course none of the Peggle masters had actually played Peggle before Bjorn hired them, because Bjorn invented it. According to Bjorn, this wasn't a problem as they caught on pretty quickly. They weren't hired entirely at random though, like Bjorn found Warren playing roulette, and that's technically a ball game, right? It's also implied that Who and Splork were fans of bowling, So, who knows, maybe Bjorn found them at a bowling alley. So, what is the Peggle Institute? Given how much detail we get on the other characters, you may be surprised to learn that the only physical evidence we get of the Institute is this stone, with Peggle Institute just written on it. Oh, and the certificates at the end, I guess. There is a building in the background of the first level, but we've seen the outline before. It's just Cinderbottom's castle viewed from the other side. And guess what? It still doesn't have a proper reflection. In fact, there is no other building that could be the Institute in the whole game. The loading screen, the main menu, and the credits screen are just out in the open. We did see a load of decorations from other casual puzzle games earlier, so maybe the castle is being used as a base of operations for Peggle. But perhaps you think it's unlikely that Bjorn would make the Institute seem bigger than it was. He wouldn't try to fool us, would he? Well, do you remember the coin that gets flipped every time you miss a shot? There's a little inscription at the top that says, First Bank of Peggopolis, even though it's also established that this is the real world with normal currency. And even if you thought the Peggle Institute was real, you'd surely agree that the First Bank of Peggopolis is a complete fiction. And sure enough, on the bottom of the coin are written the words Exercito Specula Istoc Votum Existo Verus, which, as far as I can tell, doesn't make any sense. But I think what Bjorn was trying to write in Latin was, keep on hoping that your wish comes true. A wish that just maybe he could avoid a career in advertising by setting up a small business teaching a game he made up to tourists out in the middle of nowhere. And how does this story end? His wish came true! The game he invented was a sensation all over the world and is still talked about today. The Peggle Masters, of course, were turned into minor celebrities. Soon there was Peggle Extreme, a spin-off with Half-Life Portal and Team Fortress 2 levels. There was the glamorous sequel Peggle Knights, and there was even a Peggle World of Warcraft edition. I'm not kidding. Some things had to change, of course, to make the game appeal to a wider audience. You can't have the characters mention their money problems or insecurities anymore. Things had to look happy and fun. Bjorn even started his own blog and made up stories about how Peggle was a magical game and they ate magical food and came from a magical universe. Although, if I'm being perfectly honest, I suspect the blog wasn't even written by Bjorn. And then, of course, every game developer's ultimate wish finally came true. PopCap was bought by EA for $750 million USD. Most of the original Peggle Masters left around this time, and Peggle 2 had to get a Bjorn lookalike to fill the role. The most recent installment in the franchise, Peggle Blast, introduces a new life system that you need to wait to regenerate until you can play again, and for ridiculously hard levels, you'll almost certainly need to purchase power-ups with real-world money in order to complete. PopCap saw even greater success, of course, with the release of Plants vs Zombies. In the current PC version, you can scroll down on the achievement screen and see references to their older titles, like the Bookworm, Bejeweled, Chuzzle, and a skeleton of Bjorn Unicorn. It's easy to forget that before EA, before the microtransactions, before the glamorous costumes and the spin-offs and the blog posts, Peggle was just a mismatched group of characters in a field somewhere, playing a ball game on an air hockey table and trying to sell you a certificate that says you're an extreme grandmaster of a game a unicorn just made up.
I have to say I'm really proud of this game. I think we came up with something that's different, which was, I always wanted to come up with a game that hadn't been done before. And I think we did it with this game, so that was good. I mean, there were times of despair where I'm like, no, all the games have been done before. There are no new games, and sad times. But, you know, then every once in a while, you know, you struggle for a long time, and one day maybe you come up with something new, which I think we did, and I'm happy. And in some ways, this game has been hard for me because I have to go on and make more games, and it's hard for me to get past it because I feel like we really did create something great with this game.